Welcome back to Fire Emblem Thracia 776. This is Chapter 6, and this is where the game kind of lets you breathe a little bit. This is probably the easiest of the Manster chapters. You can get through it pretty much with no combat if you want, but there are some great items, a character to recruit, and just some enemies that you can pretty reasonably tackle for some extra experience if you want. So there's plenty of reasons to stick around. There's even a shop where you can buy an iron lance for Karen, which I had forgotten about when talking about weapons she can use at base. So you can do that, but weapons are expensive in this game, in shops. But let me talk about this little intro here while it's still going. I reviewed this intro quite a bit in post, and from what I can tell, none of the English translations really lost anything important. I don't think, but there is one funny little part in here where Leaf is talking about, like, oh, well, I don't know if I'm really the kind of hero that the world needs, etc., and so on and so forth. And in at least some of the English versions, he's kind of gentle about saying, it's not really so important the exact things that you do, Leaf. It's just that what you represent. Whereas in Japanese, he's more like just straight out, Leaf, it doesn't matter if you really are awesome or not. You're the prince, people will rally behind you, it's not that big of a deal. So he's a little bit more of a cynic in the Japanese, which I think is notable. Although I have noticed that whole aspect does seem to come across somewhat, as far as the community can tell, for people who don't speak Japanese and don't play games in Japanese. So probably no harm done there, but nonetheless I'll include the passage that made me bring this up in the video's description for sure, and maybe write a little bit extra on it down there. So check that out. And then after they're done talking here, which is, in general, I think you'll notice, if you really scrutinize it, that this is wordier in Japanese, also in general, but none of the meaning really seems to have been lost so much in the English versions. And then after this, there is a part where Leaf and Karen talk a little bit, and I think August talks a little bit also to her, just saying, oh, it's great that we have somebody who rides on a bird. And Karen is like, yeah, we can skip this whole chapter if you want. There's a couple points in this game where I think they pretty much talk directly to the player in a way that's kind of funny. At least that's how I perceived it. So Karen really is the key to this chapter, I think. She lets you get all the treasures without getting hurt, pretty much. Otherwise, you pretty much have to fight every unit that is here in the beginning if you want to get all the treasure without using Karen. And she can also transport, like, Dhalsim over walls, or anybody over walls, really. But there's doors that you can unlock and go around the side without ever alerting an enemy. But as you'll see here, there is a group that spawns right outside the gates of Castle Manster, or whatever it is. And these guys are tough, but luckily what I did was pump Asbel with lots of rings and whatnot, and just give him a lot of experience, as you saw in the previous chapters. And if you do that, you can let him take on, like, a meteor hit and maybe a couple of mages. It kind of depends on if you gave him, like, a life ring, which I don't think I did at this point. Maybe I did. But if he has enough health, he can probably take on several of these guys on the first turn, if you want. And that really changes the course of this chapter a lot, because otherwise, once you alert them via getting in range of some of the enemies below, it's harder to take them on in the village rather than at the beginning, in my opinion. Because you can very easily take advantage of this row of forests, or trees, I guess they're not really forests, here in the beginning. you'll see what I mean in these coming turns. But if your Asbel is just kind of strong, it's better to just attract like 1 or 2 enemies. This is the first of several encounters in this map where the map is basically saying to you, hey, maybe you shouldn't fight these guys. And this actually continues over into the next map, really. It's trying to teach you that discretion is the better part of valor. But if you know how to approach it, this group here is you can clean up the map quite a bit by just taking them on now, or even later. But if you're not good at checking some of these houses, how they affect ranges, and just how to approach choke points, like from what angle, it can be trickier down there. Some people have expressed concern in this chapter over how long it takes Dulcin to get out, because this is an escape chapter, just like the last few chapters. And I find that actually, if you take advantage a little bit of your horses and Pegasi, that you can get him over the walls pretty quickly if you really want. I mean, they do get slowed down by him because he's so heavy, but it's not to the point where if you plan it out, you can't get it done. It's not really that big of a deal. You can see a little bit down here now that down in the town proper, it's just a few armors and soldiers, and they're not terribly strong. I think some of them do have kind of powerful weapons, but as long as you keep support partners together and whatnot, it's not a big deal. And you'll see that I have the Asbel, Nana, and Leaf continuum holding up this top part here, and I'm going to be sending pretty much everybody else down into the village. No matter what strategy you're doing, it's good to have these first couple doors open at least, so you can have anybody who's not useful for this top part escape into the bottom and get some of those objectives done, so that you can get out pretty quickly once you're done with everything. And to that end, I like to have a mounted unit lag behind a little bit, so that person can help Nana with rescuing Asbel and Leaf once it's time to go. Because you do have some time as long as you want to get these villages, and unfortunately, yes, most of the good items are clustered in the far left part of the map. As I remember, while playing this, Asbel misses quite a lot of really high percentage hits here, and that makes it take longer than it needs to overall. So I end up getting kind of cheeky with some of my other units. Giving Asbel that magic ring also helps with situations like this, because it is extra defense against like meteor and whatnot, and some of these mages can actually have pretty high attack power. So it's not just helping him overkill these armor knights, it's also his defense stat. So just bear that in mind. You'll notice Karen is sitting on a very specific square down there, and if you're good, if you're very careful, you can get most of these houses with just Karen. Not even be in range of many of these armor knights and such. But there is a house over far to the left where you kind of have to attract one of them if you're using only Karen. And she can take a hit, more or less. Might be good to have a scroll on her if you want her to just go covert and have everybody else head straight for the door. If you don't attract these guys from the top like I did, which I don't recommend for beginners, by the way, I recommend you just try and get out with as much of the treasure as you can. Then once you get in range of these guys down here, then they start funneling from the top down into the town, and they make more of a mess that way. But it also kind of makes for a more exciting chapter, sort of. So then there's this little aside where Galsus mysteriously asks for Sias to get Marita out of Manster, and you're left wondering why Galsus would care. And if you know anything about anime-styled video games and hair colors and everything, and if you listen to the conversation at the end of this chapter, it's obvious to anybody with half a brain cell what's going on, but, you know. Yeah, there goes Asbel with a double miss. I guess you have to bear in mind that there is a boss unit over there in the top leftish, sort of, and he might be giving these guys authority. And also, Raedric is technically on the map, I think, right now, and he might also be giving authority stars. So that's something that's easy to overlook, because sometimes bosses, it's like the game doesn't really intend you to fight them, and so you think that they might just be there for like story purposes or whatever, but no, they're actually having real gameplay effects. And there's a few chapters later on that we might get to where I'll try and demonstrate this, because it can make some of these chapters heck. If I could have done this over, which I can't because it's Iron Man, I probably would have just had Asbel, Leaf, and Nana run away a little bit faster, and just have Asbel take on like one guy every turn, not because he can't handle having more than one guy attacking him, especially with those guys in support range, but just because it would have required a lot less thinking for ultimately the same result. What I was basically trying to do there is like math out exactly how many of these guys he could take on, because I guess this upper right portion here of the town is a better choke point, but I don't know. Anyway, Karen is recruiting Hicks, who you can only get if his son escapes in 4X, which was 2 chapters ago. And they are all individually linked to these houses, those 6 civilians. But in practice, you'll probably just find that it's all or nothing. You either rescue all those civilians or you don't, whether that's because you missed the Gaiden or just because, I mean, you saw in 4X, it's like you open those cells and all of the civilians immediately escape. So the exit point is right next to them, so it'd be tough for only some of them to escape, although I guess it can technically happen. Come to think of it, I think right about now is where if you don't visit 4X, which I feel very sorry for you if you didn't, or if you missed it on an Iron Man, then Seti actually shows up somewhere around the top with a bunch of nameless Magi soldiers, and he will take care of a lot of that group that I drew with Asbel. So that's kind of nice, I guess, as a consolation prize for not getting Asbel and the Brave Sword and all of these items from these villages here. If you are going for a more aggressive clear of the map, then you can start just having whatever other units visit some of the villages, like Lara and Lithis and stuff like that. And you'll notice that I'm not sure if I ever really cursor over the lower right of the map, but that's where the most prominent escape point is in this map. And to get to it with foot units, you have to go through some of these doors. You could have Karen ferry them over one by one, like they talk about in the intro if you really want, but you can also just open like 3 or 4 doors and get out that way. But there is another way to do it that saves some lockpick uses, where if you instead go to the lower left and have a unit wait in front of those double doors that are down there, which you're going to see me do here, then you can just escape through there instead. And it's tough to tell that you can do that. I'm not sure that there's any indicator anywhere in Japanese or English. I'm going to speed through this last set of turns here at 4 times speed, just because I think honestly this part is kind of painful to watch, just because I do a lot of needless micromanaging with Leaf and Asbel and Nana up here, just to maximize experience. And I'm not really doing it without a purpose, because there is still stuff that this group down here needs to get done, as far as visiting houses and everything. So all in all, I didn't really waste turns, I just wasted time. And the rest of it is just mainly Fergus turning these guys into his playthings. I often get him up to like a well past promotion level here, and sometimes even do it with like the Master Seal that you get here. One of those like lower leftish or just like middle leftish villages has a Master Seal, I believe. There's also a Paragon Manual, which I always save for a particular character. One of my favorites in the entire series. And there's actually a part here where things get kind of dicey for Leaf. I don't think he technically could have died, but because of the positioning, like he didn't have the opportunity to get attacked by every single one of them. But if I had been a little bit less careful, then he could have died, I think. Especially without Nana in range, because until I get her behind this wall, it's hard for her to provide support to these guys. And some of these treasures from these houses are kind of crappy, although pure waters, holy waters, whatever you want to call them, tend to be underrated in Fire Emblem, and especially here, because you're basically giving a unit both magic attack and magic defense, and it's even useful for, non-magical units in games where those stats are split. I think I did mention in one of the previous chapters, but once you get staff users, you can use Pure Waters and then use status staves on enemies that you probably normally couldn't, because they just have too high of a magic stat. So here's what I was talking about, where I have Nana and I think Brighton ready to rescue those guys so we can get out of here at the same pace as everybody else. But I do end up, while waiting for that to happen, going up for a detour with Fergus, just to take on the boss. And sometimes I actually will sit back and capture those bishops too, because they have physics as well as meteors, and that can be a really nice stretch goal for intermediate to advanced players. But for some reason, I was really afraid of the reinforcements that come later on in this chapter, and I was just like, you know what, screw it, I'm not going to check the turn count or anything. And I couldn't remember exactly what turn they come, so I played it a little bit safer. I think in reality I had plenty of time, more or less, but you never know, and I really didn't want to lose Fergus, quite honestly. Eventually on like turn 13 or something, Cavaliers with rapiers come, and that can be dangerous with all of your guys mounted now. And then on like turn 15, Galzus comes, and a lot of people like to capture bait him and then like kill him or just get his master sword or whatever it is, which I think is a bad idea all around in every facet, but that's something people like to do. I've never actually personally seen him firsthand appear in this map, either in anybody's LP or in my own playthroughs. But this is one of those few chapters where he can show up, as well as chapter 5 in the pit. I think those are the only chapters, honestly. I don't think there are any mid-game chapters where he shows up like that. But there's this little outro cutscene after all of these guys escape, where Raedric basically talks about, like, oops, Galzus is acting of his own accord and just freeing whoever he wants from here. But you know what? He's really awesome and powerful and everything, so let's just let it fly. And that kind of seems out of character for Raedric, but, you know, whatever. But anyway, that's all we have for Chapter 6. I will see you in Chapter 7, which is another chapter that I like quite a bit. So, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.